Alright, so this is the first of probably a series of videos where I'm just going to talk a little bit about each page in the Muhammad Ali comics biography I'm working on, and just talk about the research that went into it, and maybe some creative decisions, but mostly just where things are coming from, what it's all based on. So here's the first page, start of the whole book. The chapter title I went back and forth on a lot. It's something that Joe Martin says, who was his first trainer, which I felt a little weird about having him be the voice of the first title, but I liked the implications of the statement. Do you know how to fight? Because it's means a couple of things. So I stuck with that, and I'm gonna live with that decision. So first panel of the whole book, we have, I made a decision, I really wanted to do this whole book without captions. That was really interesting to me. And then I was like, well, there'll be an opening caption. At the beginning of each chapter, we'll have just a time and a place, just to tell you where you're at. Because sometimes there's jumps between time, or here there's no context at all. Just saying Louisville 1954 tells you a lot. That's really hard to make clear without doing that. And then now there's a page of caption narration in each chapter. There's sort of an explainer page, which we'll talk more about later. So here's the first page panel. Here's the start of the whole thing. So it's Cassius Clay in front of his house with some other kids. There's a big kind of an emphasis on the sky. There's a lot of imagery of the sky in this book is very intentional. There's kind of an ascension, a transcendence theme. So seeing the kids on the ground with the sky above them is intentional, and the amount of sky, it's about half the panel. Um, and just as a starting point, you kind of have to start, I think, the story. If you're going to start when he's 12, there's some stories from when he's a baby that are good, but I decided to just get right in there when he's 12. That's when the story really starts. And the story of his bike getting stolen is kind of like his superhero origin story. So I started with that. So there he is with the bike. And then I felt like this opening before he leaves the house with these kids on the porch said something. This is actually from a quote. This is from David Remnick's book, King of the World. And there's a quote from his dad, just establishing his character when he's young, Cassius Clay. He loved to talk, said Clay's father. I'd come home and he'd have about 50 boys on the porch. This is when he was about 8 years old. And he's talking to all of them, addressing them. And I'd say, why don't you go in and go to bed? A whole neighborhood of boys. And he'd be doing all the talking. He'd always find something to talk about. So just that he could kind of hold court and was always kind of the main event even before he was a sports hero, I thought was important. So I'm just trying to kind of allude to that a little bit in this first page, just as an introduction to who he is. This was based on a photo that I took. I didn't know anything about Louisville, really. So I went there in the lead up to doing this book, and I took a bunch of pictures of this neighborhood. You'll see some more as we go. This is a house now. It's been restored. It's kind of like a national monument. There's a plaque out front and stuff, and you can take tours, or you could. You couldn't when I went there, which was a bummer. But it's it's an historical site now. This house. One thing that is maybe thinking too much, but when I actually stayed at a B&B when I went to Louisville, and this guy was like an arborist that I was staying with, and he said he had chopped down the tree in front of their house. So I asked him what kind of tree. He said it's a catalpa tree. So that's what this is here. It's a catalpa tree. And he might actually cut it down from the house that he bought his parents later. I'm not sure, but regardless, there's a catalpa tree there. So then we just see him, is kind of the first time we really see him straight on, this young Cassius Clay. That's the background is also, what it looks like across the street. I went back and forth a lot on the phrasing, just in general. It was really hard to find resources about how to folks talk in 1954 in Louisville. There's not like a ton of resources, so I ended up collaborating with Dennis Preston, who's a professor of linguistics from the University of Kentucky, and he was really helpful. So he kind of punched up a lot of this text. That phrase, "she good looking, ain't she?" I wouldn't have never known that. I didn't see that in any books or anything. So it's just showing you there's this young guy and he's kind of showing off. This is a replica of the bike that was in the Muhammad Ali Museum. I have other images of it too. I don't remember. It's like a Schwinn or something. I have it written down. I've got to spend a lot of time looking at pictures of this bike and trying to redraw it. Um, Bikes are notoriously hard to draw. So then we just see the view from the porch. There's the kids all sitting and watching him, and he's kind of bragging and talking about how great his bike is, which is again just sort of an introduction to who this guy is. It's sort of the first thing you learn about him in this book, and it's kind of a good first note. Here's this kid is kind of sassing him back. He says he's making fun of the porch. So the porch being all busted up is from his autobiography, and I don't know if it's definitely true. His autobiography is pretty dicey in terms of how true it is, but it seemed like a good. They weren't poor. They were kind of middle class. I mean, they were, you could say they were struggling, but they weren't skipping meals or anything. They were Cassius Clay grew up kind of middle class 1950s living. They were doing okay. So, but he uses the porch in his autobiography as kind of a indication that they could have been doing better, which I think is fair. So, and it's a good kind of visual symbol of how their finances change as his career really gets going. So we'll revisit that kind of subtly later on the porch. And also just a prompt for doing the dozens, which is what happens here. Because that was one of the things I wanted to establish too right away is that in addition to being a great boxer, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali was one of the great. Um, he was great at dissing. Is the most polite way I can think of it right now. Here they would call it doing the dozens. So that's what happens here. We went back and forth a lot, me and Dennis, on what the insult would be. It was a lot more elaborate when I first wrote it. It was sort of like he says the porch is busted, and then he's like, "Well, your face is busted," but it's kind of was a more. It was longer than it needed to be. It was kind of clumsy. So he just tell him he's got a melon head. He looked at the drawing. So that kid's got kind of a melon head. So that worked for me. So there you got the crooked porch up on the left, and Cassius Clay winning a battle of the dozens, and that's it. That's our first page. I mean, it's just the first page. So that's just a little opener. I wanted to open it with like a little character note. So it tells you where the story's taking place and who our main character is. It just gives you a little snippet of his personality, and that's where we end page one. So if I hope you like this project and you will follow its progress on Patreon. You go to patreon.com/oh yes very nice to subscribe to this project and help make sure it is made. Thanks for watching. I'll be volume 2 coming up soon. Thanks.